Critical pedagogy encompasses all the areas of study that aim to redress biases that have informed ways of teaching and knowing in our society. Ever since the first public school opened, the two great movements of social justice in our nation that both changed all aspects of our culture and created stronger, powerful revolutions in education are the civil rights and feminist movements. After the militant push for racial equality led to desegregation and changing of laws, Black Power activists were one of the first groups in the nation to call attention to the myriad ways education was structured to reinforce white supremacy, teaching white children ideologies of dominance and Black children ideologies of subordination. For example, they critiqued school children being taught that Columbus discovered America, and they explored the knowledge that African explorers had traveled to the soil before Europeans. Few people in our nation of any race want to remember the way in Black Power activists worked in public schools, both to see that children who were hungry would be fed and to offer with them what Malcolm X called new ways of seeing themselves in the world. Concurrently, feminist challenges to patriarchy and its concomitant insistence on the supremacy of male thinkers in their works was an insurrection that created major changes. When a critique of race and class was added to that of gender, every bias was interrogated. To progressive teachers and students, this was truly a revolution, making it possible for many of us to enter areas of study that were previously seen as areas available solely to privileged white males. Many of us attended colleges and universities that would not have enrolled us had there not been movements for equality aimed at readdressing race, sex, and class biases, and a movement for reparations and reconstruction. It was as though the use of the word affirmative deemed that a big yes was bestowed on the underprivileged by the privileged. Hence, it was prescribed the very structure of paternalistic domination that it was meant to readdress. That aside, it did make it possible for people to exploit, oppress, and or disenfranchise classes to seek higher education, just as the historical movement were imperialists, white supremacists, capitalists, patriarchy was being questioned on an international front and here at home. Drawing from the radicalism of militant freedom fighters from Africa, South America, China, and all over the world, radicalized Americans, especially those from disenfranchised groups, were learning a new language with which to articulate our place in the United States. Albert Memmi explored the relationship between the colonizer and the colonized, and Frantz Fanon looked towards decolonization. Walter Rodney showed us how European underdeveloped Africa. Leopold Sedar Senghor gave us negritude, and Amelie Cabral spoke on the decolonization of mentality. Everyone was reading Marx. Some folks were working to put together race, gender, and class so that we could all truly examine our world from an understanding of the way that differences articulate itself politically and in our daily lives. Liberation was a term constantly invoked, and it was incredibly liberating to learn a more complex political language with which to name and understand the politics of our nation. It was incredibly liberating to move past notions of personal prejudice and hatreds to look at a system of domination and how they operated interdependently. The most essential lesson for everyone, irrespective of our race, class, or gender, was learning the role of education played as a tool of colonization here in the United States. Of course, critics of this term, especially when applied to the experience of African Americans, insisted that it was inappropriately used because we were not indigenous in habits of the country we owned. The distinct language and culture, they refused to acknowledge the link between political fate of Black citizens of the United States and Black folks of the African continent. Specifically, progressive Black folks here talk about talked most about the colonization of the mind. The colonization began for Native people, for Black, for brown, and yellow people, with the assumption that our history here began with the civilizing presence of the colonizer. In Pedagogy and Process, letter to Guinea Bissau, Pulo Vire contends. The culture of the colonized was a reflection of their barbaric way of seeing the world. The culture of the colonized was a reflection of their barbaric way of seeing the world. Culture belonged only to the colonizers. The alienated experience of colonial education was only counteracted for the colonized. The alienating experience of colonial education was only counteracted for the colonized at the moment when, in an urgency for independence, they rejected some of its aspects. For many first generation to attend college Black people of color, the seeds planted that led us to reject a colonizing mentality were sowed within us prior to entering institutions, because we could not have been ready to receive the gifts of affirmation action that had we not already learned to resist passive acceptance of the pressure of dominator values of and perspectives on our identity. Perspectives on our identity. Usually we learn a measure of resistance to dominant culture within our homes. That spirit served us well in educational institutions where we faced an onslaught of biased dominator thinking. Without a decolonizing mentality, smart students from disenfranchised backgrounds often find it difficult to succeed in the educational institutions of dominator culture. This holds true even for those students who have embraced the values of dominated culture. Dominant culture. In fact, those students may be the last prepared for the barriers they face because they have so convinced themselves that they are different from the other members of their group. A major flaw in our nation's powerful movement for social justice has been and remains the assumption that liberation will take place in one fell swoop. That has been detrimental to progress, simply because once certain gains in the direction of equality were achieved, the struggle stopped. And of course, that is dangerous. When one is attempting to construct subcultures of self-determination within the framework of dominator culture, we would all have fared better in our struggles to end racism, sexism, and class exploitation if we had learned that liberation is an ongoing process. We are bombarded daily by a colonizing mentality, one that not only shapes consciousness and action, but also provides material rewards for submission and acquaintances. That far exceeds any material gains for resistance, so we must be consistently engaged in new ways of thinking and being. We must be critically vigilant. This is no easy task, but most people spend most of their days working within dominator culture. Those of us who work in education have been particularly fortunate because individually we are able to work against reinforcing dominator culture and biases with little or no resistance. College professors have tremendous freedom in the classroom. Our major difficulty is sharing knowledge from an unbiased and or decolonized standpoint with students who are so deeply mirrored in dominator culture that they are not open to learning new ways of thinking and knowing. Recently, I gave a lecture when I was a young white female student, boldly Recently, I gave a lecture wherein a young white female student boldly stated during an open discussion, "I am one of those evil capitalists you critique. I do not want to be changed by participating in your classroom or reading your books." After I called attention to the fact that the word evil was not used during my lecture or any work referred to, I was able to share that in all my classes I teach and I make it clear from the start that my intent is not to create clones of myself. Boldly, I affirmed my primary intent as a teacher is to create an open learning community where students are able to learn how to be critical thinkers, able to understand and respond to material we are studying together. I added that it has been my experience that as students become critical thinkers that they often, of their own free will change perspectives. Only they know whether that is for the better. Since there has not been a radical transformation of education at its roots, education as the practice of freedom is still a pedagogy accepted only by individuals who elect to concentrate their efforts in this direction. We deliberately choose to teach in ways that further the interests of democracy. That's not right. Of justice. Since the radical interventions in education that have helped end many discriminatory practices, thereby creating diverse contexts for unbiased learning, have been severely attacked by dominator culture, their impact is diminished. Concurrently, many radical thinkers often speak radical theory and that engage in conventional practices sanctioned by the dominator culture. Certainly, rewards received by dominated educational hierarchy diminish efforts to resist and transform education. Understanding deliberation is an ongoing process. We must pursue all opportunities to decolonize our minds and the minds of our students. Despite severe setbacks, there have been and will continue to be constructive radical shifts in the way we teach and learn as minds stayed on freedom, teach to transgress and transform.